What to do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. Also, remember, if it's a dark and stormy night and you need a drink to warm the depths of your heart, we at the Brothers on Books go with Encha Matcha, the best matcha for the best brothers. And now our listeners will get 10% off when they use the link or the coupon code in the show notes. I'm Alex Elwell, and with me as always is my brother Jack Elwell. Jack, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Al. It's a great morning. I even have my enchilada right here, ready to go.
There we go. Encha Matcha, the best matcha for the best brothers. Jack,
So
what book are we doing, Jack?
today we are reading The Road to Freedom, Economics in the Good Society by Joseph E. Stiglitz. It's probably Stiglitz, but yeah, he is a Nobel Prize-winning economist and the best-selling author of People, Power, and Profits, Globalization and Its Discontents Revisited, The Price of Inequality, and Free Fall. He was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Clinton, chief economist of the World Bank, named by Time as one of the 100 most influential individuals in the world, and now teaches at Columbia University and is a chief economist of the Roosevelt Institute. So, Al, this was your pick in the book draft. What got you to pick this book in the first place, and what drew your interest?
Uh, I was sent a article probably close to 8 months ago where someone was highlighting a review of this and how they were talking about how Hayek got everything wrong. And this book like proves that Friedrich Hayek was totally wrong, and all the Austrian economists have everything like 180 degrees backwards. I mean, so like that would be Milton Friedman, I guess Thomas Sowell. Like, so I've read a decent amount, I mean, of Thomas Sowell's book, but I've listened to uh, Milton Friedman talk a lot, and I generally believe, or to me, what he's saying generally makes sense. So I was just curious as to what Dr. Stiglitz would have to say. So that's what made me choose the book.
So,
It
like,
ended
what
up
was
being
what was Friedman saying?
Freeman would be like free markets, like should have minimal government intervention. There shouldn't be like, yeah, government intervention in markets. People should be allowed to make decisions on their own. They should be voluntarily allowed to enter contracts to do, for the most part, what they want to do. And that will lead to a freer and more prosperous society. And I feel like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like there's a lot of semantics going on when I read some of these things or I listen to these people talk, um, just in how things are defined or like what people think or like what they say. Like, I don't know if it's really, they're all that different. Um,
I agree. I
but
was gonna bring some of those things up, but I guess just as an overview, this book was divided into three parts. The first part is liberty and freedom. Second part is freedom, beliefs, and preferences, and the creation of the good society. Part three is what kind of economy promotes a good, just, and free society. And I guess I would, and in the preface, he does bring up this point a lot, like what happens when one person's freedom comes at someone else's expense. And he's got this quote, freedom from the wolves has often meant death to the sheep. And I would say like, I'm also, or at least in my mind, I think I am like pretty free market. But in some ways, after reading this, I realize I'm not as free as maybe I thought because freedom, like if you really went to the extreme, like if everyone was doing whatever they want, people literally, like if freedom for some person was like cutting your head off and just taking your stuff, like, yeah, I don't want that. So I guess I don't want complete and utter freedom for all.
Yeah.
So
Go on.
yeah, I guess when he said that freedom for the wolves is often meant death for the sheep, I kind of could relate to that. Like, yeah, I'm with you on that. Like I can that is some common ground just from the get-go. I can get on board with that statement.
Right. So like the some of the problems I have is like that is in essence, I feel like a straw man of what, is being proposed by the opposition. Like they are not anarchists here. This is not like even if you listen to, Ron talk, Ron says like there is a government is not you need government. Like it's not there's no government. You do need some government. Like you do have I mean he talks about social contracts all the time. You need to have rules in society that
Mhm.
govern how people interact with each other. I mean that what's the point? The point is to enforce contracts, protect private property, right? These are the main if you talk to people that really believe this, this is like the main purpose of government. And what is protecting private property if you're not protecting your head from someone else cutting it off? I mean, that is the most private of property. I don't think, yeah, I
But
agree.
I guess the point is enforcing private property is not totally free. That's the point.
Right, but they're not arguing like it's just it's either taken I feel like it's either taken out of context or just warped. Like no
Mhm.
one they're not saying unfettered. I mean, he keeps talking about unfettered free markets. He's not talking about total freedom. Like
You're
there's
right. I agree. He misuses that word because he oftentimes talks about unfettered financial markets, but it's it's not free in the sense because the government keeps bailing them out.
right. Yes. He's
So
blaming he's blaming, the institutions when the government is doing the wrong thing of bailing them out. I agree.
I guess one thing I had an issue with the language, and so from the get-go, he's saying, and this is back to your how important the definitions are, and that they might not be talking about so much the opposite things, or they might have a lot of the same views and might just be talking past themselves.
Are
So
you
he's
about to
saying
say
he, he
efficiency?
he's blaming he calls it neoliberalist, I think, capitalism or neoliberal capitalism. And so, like, what is that? Like, I've never seen that phrase. I actually looked up in the Uncommunist Manifesto. I went back and looked through just to see if they defined it. They do not. And from what I can tell from his definition, he's basically talking about crony capitalism. He's talking about private companies putting money into politicians and then getting unfavorable
Kickbacks.
treatment, basically.
Yeah, right.
So I guess if someone were reading the Uncommunist Manifesto, they would be looking for the term crony capitalism, whereas he's calling it neoliberal capitalism.
Right.
Or
And
I
that's
guess cronyism and Uncommunist
and
Manifesto.
and if you go back and talk to those other economists, they would say that is not right. Iran talks about this all the time. He would also say that that is not correct, that you shouldn't be able to buy. Schiff talks about this. Schiff complains about this all the time. Peter Schiff, that is.
Mm-hmm.
About how it's like bastardized capitalism and it's giving capitalism a bad name. He like says that almost daily, I feel.
Right. In the
Um,
Uncommunist Manifesto, they were saying what people call capitalism is really like cronyism.
right.
But the difference, I guess, is in the Uncommunist Manifesto, they're saying like, okay, this is not free, but Mr. Stiglitz is saying this is basically too free for the banks,
Right. Yeah.
which is like they're both against the bailouts essentially,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
they're talking past themselves.
So,
Okay, so one thing I really thought would be cool to talk about. So he
cool.
uses a lot of language like either you're being exploited or you're doing the exploiting.
Yeah. He
Like
works at
each transaction. So he talks about casinos exploiting addictions, pop-ups in Facebook trying to, if they know you're a gambling addict, to get you to go to some online gambling website. So I guess first question is like, how do you feel about like everyone either being the exploiter or the exploited.
I mean, I honestly, I think it's ridiculous. Like,
Okay.
I mean, there is some, like, there are scenarios where I think it is probably true. Like what you just said, like Facebook using their algorithm to push gambling to gambling addicts, that is probably, I would say that is probably a little exploitative. Uh, some of these things I've read about food companies, some of this like processed food, like purposely spiking food with like things that make you just want to keep eating it.
Mhm.
Like and not he has a chapter where he's talking about not uh asymmetries in information. It's like
Mhm.
where the buyer has way more information than the seller, or sorry, the seller has way more information than the buyer. So if you're buying something and you don't know that it will have that negative of effect on you, and the seller knows that, I think there's an argument that that could be exploitative. But
Mhm.
For
So,
the most
mhm.
part, I think people should be allowed to do what they want to do as long as it's not injuring others. Like, uh, I guess I just if I bought my house, I think he described it as buyer beware. I had a
Obligation,
no, what's the word I'm looking for? What
responsibility.
no. What's the guy that comes and does the check? A home inspection. I had a home
Okay.
inspection done, right?
Uh-huh.
So there were issues that came up with the house. I still bought the house. Like if they if are they obligated? I mean, if they're knowingly doing something to the house and then trying to pawn it off on me, I think that would be bad. But if they in their best interests have outlined everything they know about the house, and I look at the house and I want the house, I should be able to buy it.
Mhm. What about
Uh,
in terms of preying on like addictions? So I
yeah,
guess I guess the first question is, so
I said
I had to look this up.
I said I thought that was bad.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious, but now I'm getting into like kind of wording because what actually is an addiction? Because I had to actually look it up because I was having trouble like describing it. So when I looked it up, it says physically and mentally dependent on a particular substance and unable to stop taking it without incurring adverse effects. So it says a particular substance. Um, so I mean, from that definition, gambling is not an addiction because it is not a substance, I would say. But maybe they're talking about like chemically in the brain. I don't quite know because I was thinking, well, for some people, like going to a casino could be an addiction, but for others, it's just entertainment. Like, so would you ban all casinos? I guess my point is, for some people, one thing can be an addiction, whereas it
Sure.
totally doesn't affect another person. And I was also
Well,
thinking like video games or, just going to the movies.
so
Like,
there are things that I think I don't know, you would probably define it as some threshold. There are chemical substances that will cause almost all humans to become addicted to it within one use.
mhm.
Like
Because
some
I
of
was also
those.
thinking technically, I mean, I would say that humans are an addiction. We are addicted to interacting with other humans. So if like a dating site, is that preying on someone's addiction to meet someone or interact with someone? I don't know. I just felt like there's some like weird areas you could go depending on how you define an addiction.
I mean, I would argue that dating sites definitely prey on people. Uh,
So
and
that's
in a way, yeah. I mean, I don't know. He makes it sound like all business is bad for trying to make money. Like, yes, some businesses have bad practices. I feel like over the long run, the businesses with bad practices will go out of business. Um, right? People that abuse their customer base will eventually fall by the wayside, and people that treat their customers well, that provide a good product and service will, grow and flourish.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, like how you define I mean, by the definition you just read, it has to be a substance. Like it can't be, uh, it can't be anything else. I feel like I was listening to Jonathan Haidt recently, and he was talking about like porn addictions that are popping up in young men. And I guess that would also not fall under your category,
Hmm.
the definition you just read. And
But yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, right, the definition I just read. But I guess it also, yeah, it depends on how you
I guess I would just
depends, I guess, on how you define then substance too, particular substance. I don't know.
I mean, I guess I would just I would just take out substance, and then the definition is, more or less something that you are dependent on that you feel like you can't not do without an adverse effect.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, I've had people tell me I'm addicted to playing pickleball. I, you know,
Right.
I feel or addicted to exercising. I mean, I feel bad when I don't on a daily, like on a day I don't go and exercise. I usually feel bad. Like I feel fat, I feel slow. Uh,
Hmm.
right? Isn't that an adverse effect?
Yeah,
Um,
I would definitely agree. I mean, there's clear, I would consider a lot of like athletes are addicted to whatever they're pursuing and, but I guess I wouldn't have defined all addictions as being bad. I guess that's when he's kind of saying he would get rid of the environment that's producing some of these addiction or catering to some of these addictions. I, I guess in my mind, I never really assumed all addictions are bad.
okay, so I guess this goes back to sort of one of the problems that I had with his book. He brings up the Roosevelt quote. We should the general gist is that people should have the removal of freedom of fear. Like the freedom of fear should be you should be free of fear, all humans. I don't remember the exact quote. Do you know what I'm
Right.
talking about though?
I think that was in the very beginning of the book.
Beginning.
I don't really
Right.
remember.
Yes. Yes, it was. So like he's talking about how we should remove people should be free of fear. But like in some instances it's not possible. Like
Hmm.
he's like generalizing it. There are obviously in any society there are going to be bad actors. Like you can't protect everyone from everything at all times. Uh, I feel like I've lost my train of thought. The addiction stuff. You can't protect all citizens from everything. Man, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, it's all right. But I kind of get, I think where you're going is like, you're kind of implying that people aren't able to protect themselves from their own choices.
Yeah, yes. And that they, to have I said an overall flourishing society, there are going to be some bad actors in that society. You can't minimize all the risks. Like
Hmm.
I mean, the one thing that was, he talks about the Second Amendment a lot. Like, is and he equates, I mean, I thought this was an absolutely ridiculous, comparison, but he was saying my freedom to have a gun is tantamount to your to being greater than your freedom to be alive. I mean, isn't that just an insane statement? Like, is my
Um,
freedom to drive a car tantamount to your freedom to not be alive?
right.
There are
Yeah.
more people that are killed in car crashes than gun violence. Like, I mean, what are we talking? Like, I get what he's saying. Like, where sometimes, yes, if you allow people to have guns, people are going to get shot, which is like terrible and tragic. But if you allow people to drive cars, people are going to, get into car accidents and kill other people. People are going to drive drunk and kill people. Like
Yeah.
you have laws against these things. You can't shoot people. Like you're not supposed to drive drunk, right?
Hmm.
There are laws against both these things. I don't you can't mitigate all of the risks in society.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're all living in, bubble wrapped environments where I feel like nothing gets done.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think actually last I there was some stat I saw that more kids die from pools than maybe it was guns, or I don't know. I was surprised, I guess.
Or heart attacks. I think cardiovascular diseases are still one of the large leading causes of death. Like, are we supposed to outlaw all unhealthy foods, and then are we supposed to force people to exercise? Like,
Mhm.
I don't get. I feel like when you start regulating at this level, like, yeah, I
I mean,
don't.
I kind of get some of the stuff on like, um, if the society as a whole is more out of shape, and then it's like kind of like a strain on the healthcare system, people pay more in premiums. On the flip side, like if you were an annuity buyer, you might be paying less in premiums. But where was I going with that? But I guess if I was constructing a world, I'm kind of like with him. Like I would cut out some of these things, like because I do agree that oftentimes the easiest way to change habits is change the environment or like the practices. So like if I were in charge, yeah, there would be a lot of things I would just say, no, this is not allowed, or like that we're just getting rid of this. Like
Sure,
like, but
but
it's
that's
like right. I don't feel like I'm in a position to. I mean, if people want to go do drugs on the street, yeah, I don't like seeing it, but if that's what you want to do, go ahead, I guess. Um, if you just want to be in your own little cup. But I gotta say, I was kind of scared when I was in Albuquerque a couple months ago with all the people doing drugs on the street. That was the first time I had seen that. I did not like seeing that. But that kind of a sidebar.
I don't disagree with that statement, but like I feel like this comes back to why it's difficult to compare the states with I feel like it's always these comparisons with like Nordic countries where essentially everyone wants exactly the same thing and it's very homogeneous. Like
Hmm.
United States is an
Yeah.
incredibly heterogeneous country with, vastly different people. And this comes back to I feel like this goes back to the discussion we had in Non-Communist Manifesto, where the point of the country is that the states themselves are supposed to be different so people can kind of self-segregate into societies they want to live in.
Hmm. And I think one other thing, I mean, he does keep coming back to, he makes these kind of like backhanded comments that Europe's doing a better job at this or that. But like, it's kind of, we are like, and we've become more globalized. So it's not really fair to look at everything in a vacuum and just say these people are better off. But it's kind of like neglecting, like, okay, the presence of the US has somehow benefited them, probably. The presence of China has probably benefited them through globalization. It's not really fair to just look at them in silos when it's really not siloed. I guess is my thing.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like at one point he was making the case that the economic mobility, he was saying like in America, like you're essentially you'll be rich if your parents were rich. He was making this case that the economic mobility here had gone down a lot,
Hmm.
but I feel like it's still better here than in Europe. At least,
I would say it does seem to be at the moment, but I do feel like it's getting a lot more similar than I ever thought it would get.
right, it's becoming similar downwards in
Right.
that
Well,
the
it's
economic mobility in Europe is way less.
right, but
Like
I
if
feel like
you're
the US is getting less.
right, we're getting less because I mean, I feel like it's the exact opposite of what he's saying. Like there's more intervention, it's becoming harder to make it.
Yeah,
There's
I
more
mean,
regulation, there's more taxes, there's more all these other things from the government, not less.
yeah.
I feel like he's right. Like the hope to be able to become economically successful is a big driving factor. It's like I feel like it's a good beacon of hope for society. Like if you actually believe that, I feel like you will work hard and probably make it. But if you feel like everything's against you and you can't make it, you probably won't.
Yeah, that's why a lot of the people on the poorer side are buying all the lottery tickets because they feel like they have no hope. That's their best chance at making it. So they're
Okay.
going further out on the risk curve.
So I mean, it's been a while, but like the statistic from Sol's Basic Economics is that I think 80% of America, this would have been as of I think like 2000 maybe. Don't quote me
Mhm.
on the years, but like 80% of America at one year or another will be in the top 1% of earners.
Yeah, I think that was that in, didn't he talk about that also in
He talks about it a
discrimination and
lot. Yeah,
disparities?
it's
Okay.
very
I
possible he
thought I
put
had
in
seen
that,
that
but
somewhere.
like that is not
Um,
true of Europe. So I mean that is still I think a lot more mobility than Europe has. At least how I mean from what I've read and how you've described it.
I would just say, well, what I've noticed, just this is just anecdotally, like what I've noticed, it just seems like maybe it's because we're just getting older and I wouldn't have noticed it before, but it seems like a lot more people are inheriting their housing than maybe 10, 15 years ago
Here or in Europe?
here. And I feel like
Uh,
it's,
yeah, I would say the same.
and that's kind of because housing's such a big issue and it's, number one expense for most people, every country. Um, so I guess that's just kind of what I've noticed.
It's probably because there are moguls like you that just buy up all the houses, Jack.
Yeah. But this also like I honestly, and I was having a discussion with my wife on this last night. Like I don't just naturally like real estate. The only reason I got into real estate is because it's advantageous here. It is not advantageous in other countries. And I can see why people come here from out of country to buy real estate. We are the only country that has 30-year fixed debt. So like and that benefits the citizens. So that's one advantage. And I guess my response, and he's kind of making it out like perhaps the real estate owners are the exploiters, but I would almost say that there's nothing preventing people from buying, any land really. I mean, I'm selling, acre plots in Arizona for $4,000 a pop. Like I think most people can afford that. Like I guess my point is just the government policies are essentially incentivizing people to act in a certain way. And back to like the nomad capitalist quote, go where you're treated best. Like for certain things, you're treated best in certain countries for certain activities. So why not just go where you're treated best, I guess.
I mean,
And
so
yeah,
no, go on.
no, that was about it, I guess.
I was just gonna say, like, on your point, I mean, I know we both have real estate in Michigan, but like when I look at my rental income for my houses in Michigan, it is surprising to me that people will rent because their rent is often, I mean, yes, you then deal with the responsibility of homeownership, like you have to do the repairs, but their rent is, for the most part, substantially higher than the mortgage, or at least what the mortgage would have been. So I guess the question is like, why then are they renting and not buying? They're choosing not to buy. I mean, it is true that some of them may not be able to get a loan, but most of them would have the money to be able to do it, at least from a month-to-month basis. They maybe wouldn't have enough to get to put down the down payment, or they wouldn't have the wherewithal to save the money for a down payment. But I do feel like they probably could save the money if they decided that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah, I
Um,
think this comes
it's
back to the
what
education
you,
component that he's kind of saying is, some people are advantaged because they have resources to know, how to acquire credit, how to acquire capital, zibby zibby.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, this also goes back to discrimination disparities. There are differences amongst all people. Like you
Hmm.
can't treat everyone as not, everyone should be treated under the same under the law, but people are not the same. Like people have, different abilities. People perform at different functions. Like it would be silly for me to ask you to go into a lab and make something.
Hmm.
You couldn't do it, right? Just like you couldn't
Right.
ask me to go, underwrite some insurance premiums. I couldn't do it. I mean, I guess we both, I mean, it's sort of a bad example. We've both had extensive training in that, but I mean, you get the point. Um,
Hmm.
uh,
I guess another thing, well, another like one of the assumptions I guess he makes throughout the book when he talks about redistribution, I think is the trust component. I mean, he touched upon it a little bit in the end, but like trust in the people that are redistributing. And in some ways, I would I kind of like the idea of redistributing, and I think you would too. I think you give to charity at some points in your life. That means you trust whoever is distributing that money.
yeah, those are different things though.
No, but it's the same concept. So like I guess the point is if you trust the people that are doing the redistributing or managing of whatever funds you're giving, then I can see some of these aspects working out. Like, I mean, I have voluntarily entered into an HOA. I pay an HOA. The HOA is basically a microcosm of a government. And I have voluntarily done that. And I only do that because I trust how they're allocating the money. If I stop trusting them, I would exit. I guess the difference is here with the whole government is I think there is a lack of trust in the redistributing. I mean, we see like the politicians getting rich, with what most people would say is like insider trading in a lot of ways. You see, I mean, I've just appealed um like a tax assessment on a couple of properties because the taxable value has gone up so much. They say like your taxes haven't gone up, but if the taxable value's gone up a lot, well, I'm basically it feels like I'm getting robbed. Like it feels like you're robbing me, like you're stealing from me. So I guess they're my point is some of these things are all good and dandy, and I think they do work in small cases when you trust the people that are managing the money. But if you lose trust, none of it works.
Yeah. I mean, the
Um,
problem, I guess the problem I have with redistribution is when I give to charity, I choose to do so.
mhm,
When redistribution takes place, it's exactly what you just said. It is forced upon me. It is by nature coercive.
mhm.
So like that, I don't think that's more like I just don't think it's right. Like even if I just like take for what he's saying true, like redistribution will lead to a better society,
Mhm.
I still don't think it's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think this go back, and I think this is a good exercise, like this veil of ignorance that he talks about. So this is, I think, John Rawls' concept. Like
Yeah.
when you're designing a society and what he's calling like the good society, you want to envision all the possibilities. Like, are you born male? Are you born female? Are you rich? Are you poor? Are you black? Are you white? Are you Hispanic? Are you disabled? Are you healthy? Like, you want to be able to think about all those combinations. And if you don't know how you're going to be born, what type of society do you want to live in? Like, what safeguards do you want to have? And that's I mean, a political choice. It's as a group. Um, I don't know any thoughts on like the veil of ignorance? Because I mean that was I mean I've heard that a lot. I kind of forgot that name, but I like
Yeah.
that thought experiment.
I mean, I think it's a good exercise. I get what he's saying. I just think like I feel like what he's arguing against is not what his I mean his the people he's like criticizing are dead. Like I feel like that's not what they're saying though. Like they're not saying like, yeah, he's arguing. I feel like he's arguing against crony capitalism when he's talking about the value of ignorance, which I agree with, right? Like
Yeah.
same with the non-communist manifesto. Like I don't think that's right. I think yes, like that type of behavior should be weeded out of society. I agree with that. Uh,
Mhm.
I think it is a good exercise, but I don't think the answer is that everyone should, we should go more or less to everyone being, like I guess like I said, everyone should be equal under the law,
Mhm.
but like not like I don't know, the common word is like equity, like everyone should have the same equity in society or whatever. Like everyone
Mhm.
should not have the same equity because everyone's production or everyone's what's the word I'm looking for? Everyone's contributions to society are not the same.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, what do you think about some of the statements about like it's been, and sometimes he just makes these blanket statements like it's been shown that private, healthcare and private education just have these perverse results. Like they just don't work.
yeah,
I,
I don't know where I don't remember if there were a lot of statements he had that had no citations that I just thought were like kind of very just assertions with no citation that to be fair if there was a citation I wouldn't have looked it up anyway
Mhm.
but because
I mean,
I was behind in the reading
because
but
he kept talking about like, every kid should have the privilege or the right to reach their full potential. And this, can't be obtained through private education. But in my mind, like, not everyone is, and who's to say what the right education is for any given kid? Because, I mean, we don't learn how to grow food. Should we learn how to grow food in our public education? Like, what things, and so who are we trusting to say what is adequate, what isn't adequate? And I guess my point is that education takes many forms, and we're kind of going along with one form. And
I mean he even put it in there in that in the education section part of the education is to essentially inculcate kids into society like to make them like more or less like worker bees that's at least how I was reading that.
Mhm.
Because I don't know if you remember back to I think it was episode 10, the Dictator's Handbook, the highest reading
North Korea
North
literacy
Korea,
rate, yeah.
right? But they're not taught how to think. They're not taught how to think. Like I always find it weird to say taught how to think, but like they're not. There is a critical thinking is a skill. Uh,
Hmm.
and I feel like you need to sort of grow that skill. And I think in many regards, it's the most important thing and that's really what, all of my education, all of grad school, that was the thing that really I feel like I took away from it the most, like the feeling that I can go figure things out. Not
Hmm.
necessarily just the information, but the feeling that if I need to figure something out, I can go do it. And
Hmm.
I don't know, when I talk, I feel like I interact with now a lot of younger kids just through sports. And I feel like that is missing. And I feel like that goes back to a lot of what he's saying about just inculcating kids into society. It's like just this is what you do. You don't question anything, and you just like sort of keep moving forward with
So, okay, so here's a question that just came to me kind of when you were saying, so if they're trying to groom the kids in a certain way, could we say the education system is part of crony capitalism?
uh yeah, I don't know if I would I don't know if I would say that.
Okay, I'm just curious because yeah, I think we got our education system from the Germans, and they're very kind of robotic in nature. They want to groom people that do specific job functions, and maybe that's just buying into the system basically, or um, getting into the system that way.
Right. I mean, I guess like one of the best parts about capitalism is you are free to do what you are passionate about. You're free to do what you want. You're not told. Like, isn't it the case in Germany? Like you take essentially standardized tests that like put you on a path, like a working
Right,
path?
right.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Could we say like education is kind of, or like a public education, because certain actors are probably influencing how the public education is, that maybe that would be part of, well, I guess, crony
I
capitalism.
guess, yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah, I could see
Um,
that. I mean, I feel like that's like, don't you think that's wrong? Like, would you want to live? Would you have been happy growing
I mean,
up in that type of society?
I guess the alternative is, and this goes back to, I guess, the veil of ignorance. Like, if you're born poor, how do you integrate into society and have a chance? Because I guess, what's the alternative? The alternative is parents take on the responsibility to educate their kids, or their parents have to find someone privately to educate their kids in whatever way they deem fit. And I guess that would be like the most free, right? Because
What do you
that,
mean? We have you could have. I mean, you could have a better form of what we have, where there's a public education system and the kids are free to go out and choose to do whatever they want to do.
but are they, but actually are, I mean, is that actually how it is right now? Like, if you just
No
wanted to
one.
teach your kids how to grow food, is that actually, like, would that be allowed? And like live off the land?
You could. I think there are. I don't think that would be allowed. I think if you were to homeschool your children, there are requirements that have to be met.
I guess that's what, I guess, in my
But it,
mind, that's what I'm getting at. That there are these certain requirements, like, these certain predefined skills that they say you need to have, or you need to
okay,
learn about.
sure. And I would
Um,
say there's silly skills in many regards. Like,
mhm.
why is like how to do your taxes never taught, or how to,
And I guess
invest.
that's why I think it kind of fits into the crony capitalism narrative, because they don't want you to, know a lot of this stuff, because they just want you to go work for these companies that have an interest in the education system.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's fair. You've convinced me, Jay.
Okay. Okay. Um,
I guess just real quick, this is sort of dovetailing off of, this is somewhat irrelevant. The
mhm.
thing in the first part of this book that was driving me nuts was his use of the word efficiency,
Okay.
and how he kept saying that markets were not efficient. But I feel like when you're talking about efficiency, like you need to either provide a standard of like what is efficient,
Hmm.
or it has to be in comparison. So like I deal with this at work a lot. Like when I'm looking at two possible, routes to make something, if I'm always looking at the yield.
Hmm.
So if the yield of like route A is 10%, that's not very, I would never consider that efficient. But
Hmm.
if the yield of route B is 20%, B is more efficient than A.
Hmm.
It's still not very efficient, but if that is the best option, then that is like what you're going to go with, even if it's not efficient.
Hmm.
So his argument that markets aren't efficient is, I guess, what is then the alternative, or like
Uh-huh.
what would your standard of what being efficient is? I feel like he's saying that they don't provide options that are wanted. And I feel like the actual point of markets is that if you allow it enough time, eventually, if there is a need, the market will fill it. Someone will come in and start selling the product you want,
Hmm.
which for the most part, I think is true. Like you can go buy whatever you want here. I don't know what he's looking for that isn't being sold.
Um, so I guess a couple things I would say on, like when so yeah, I don't even remember if he defined efficient at
He
all.
didn't. No, he did
Okay, so
not.
like when I think of competitive, at least in the econ book, at least how I learned I mean, the schematic, the formulas and graphs, they're really not realistic because a lot of the assumptions are like every firm is the same, and firms are free to enter, and basically, um, if they have like a lower marginal cost, they can lower their prices and then the prices keep going down. But basically, a lot of the assumptions are like, all firms are the same or they act in the same way.
Yeah, I mean these
And
are silly assumptions. I agree with him there.
yeah, so I guess it's kind of like, well, uh, I mean, what am I trying to say? I guess I'm trying to say like, yeah, a lot of the things he's critiquing, well, yeah, I mean, they're not actually how things operate.
Right, but like so
Uh,
my point is like what is the alternative?
uh-huh.
Like to have a top-down approach. Like imagine how inefficient is the opposite, a top-down approach where everything that's made and produced is dictated by a central authority. And how inefficient is that? How many shortages do you have there? Like you're not getting
Hmm.
anything. You have one option.
I mean,
Like what?
one thing I know that like what you're saying kind of pops up in my head, but I don't really know much about it. But like certain insurances, like on coastal areas where like normal insurance, and I think he talks about like a lack of risk products for certain risks.
Yes,
Um,
he talks about that a
and
lot.
um, I mean,
And
are there risks that you would buy insurance on that you can't find right now? Well, I guess I would need to think about that a little bit.
see, I think if you looked hard enough, you could find someone to sell you that type of insurance policy. I mean,
I think,
I don't know like what I don't know like what risk he's talking about. I mean, I mean, I have life insurance, I have health insurance, dental insurance. We just upped our company policies and I was able to buy lump sum payments on a litany of different injuries. If I break my leg, I could have bought an insurance policy where if I break my leg, I get paid out like 5 grand just in the
mhm.
next year. I mean, I don't know. Uh, I guess yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's something, but I'm sure you can find someone that will sell it to you.
Yeah, um, yeah, at a certain price for sure. Um, I don't know, any other,
Well, we haven't. I mean, I don't know. Do you want to go into the? I feel like you probably want to talk about the pan stuff.
okay, so, I mean, maybe you can like kind of because I feel like I don't actually know because I'm very confused actually how drugs somehow have patents and like some other things don't seem to really be protected. Like certain, well, I guess I was thinking I couldn't remember how like Uber and Lyft like came to be, but I somehow remember like Uber was on the scene and then it seemed very soon after Lyft came on the scene. So like that was one thing that popped into my head. Like, so why wasn't Uber like protected um in that respect? And then I mean he brought up like, how do we have multiple cars? Why can't math equations be patented? Because I'm sure there's so many math equations that propelled technology and innovation like so much that why like I guess how do how do the patents work right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk from a chemical. I was actually just doing a patent review. I can only talk from a chemical perspective. But when you're patenting something for a drug,
Uh-huh.
what you're patenting is usually it's referred to as the chemical space. But in reality, what you're doing is you're patenting the actual chemical makeup of your drug. So, uh, and then if you're going to make someone is then going to compete against that, it has to be usually 2 points of difference. So you need 2 points of difference from the chemical space that they've patented. And usually the way it works is you start very globally. So if you can imagine, I mean, uh, if you can imagine a somewhat like complex structure, you sort of you sort of dumb it down into its barest, it's referred to as a scaffold. So like the barest core of the structure, and you're putting your initial patent is usually over that initial core, and then you're expanding outwards. So you're going from like, this is generally what we've made, and then as you narrow in, this is really like what's being protected. Does that make sense?
I guess because I mean, well, I want to get back to he brought up like the mRNA like platform that was used for some of the vaccines, but also so are you saying like so if someone created a drug like if we just added like a couple different things to it that have like no adverse effects, like is that allowed? I guess it's probably not, right?
No, it is.
So like if you took some drug and just added like some placebo like sugar or something,
You
like
would
you could make
still,
that.
if you were another company, you would still have to go through, well, if you just added a sugar, no. But if
So I
you
so I
you
guess so is that what you mean by 2 points of difference or two?
yes, yeah. You need to change it in like it's usually two different spots drastically. But you still have to go, if you were a separate company, you would still have to go through testing, which is why it's then it's prohibitive to do it.
Uh-huh.
But like if someone owns the space, you can't really use it. That's where it becomes sort of problematic. I mean, these patents are like just so global. Like, yeah, I to some extent I kind of agree with them. The patents are written with like such legalese, and they're just so globally like they're just saying like, yeah, we claim everything. But like you really get down to what they're claiming, it's very specific.
So when you say globally, do you mean like actually around the globe? Like, because that was another thing I was kind of
No,
confused
no,
about.
sorry,
Because
sorry, sorry. That's not what I mean. I mean like chemically globally. Like
okay,
you just patent like a very specific uh a very like very common structure, and they're just like, you just point, you're like branching off of this very common like chemical structure, and you're saying like, yeah, we panned this. It's like, really? Like you're panning something that everyone like, you obviously don't own this structure. Everyone uses these. This is in like every drug. They're just like
hmm
basing, it's just like it's just, yes, it is to prevent other people from trying to infringe on their space. That is true. But when you really get down to it, it would not hold up.
hmm
Like,
And what is like the international? Because it sounded like he was bringing up certain countries weren't able to produce like the COVID-19 vaccine, even though they said they had the ability to, but they were kind of it sounded like they were prevented from because of these patents.
yeah, I didn't. I read that. I didn't really know. You're right.
Okay.
That's how he made it sound like. I didn't really know anything about that.
Okay.
I didn't.
And then so maybe that's also so and I guess this is maybe his point on how some of the bigger countries are kind of making other less advantageous countries sign certain agreements that really isn't in their best interest to protect companies domestically or certain industries. But I guess another, and I guess this is a separate topic, but he was talking about the mRNA platform on which Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were largely publicly financed. But then Pfizer and Moderna get the protection once they create it, like in a patent.
Yeah.
So
So I
how do you
mean,
feel about that, I guess?
well, so the ins and outs of that situation, I'm not super sure with. I feel like I have seen this a lot where you'll see professors, take government money, develop some type of idea, and then spin it off to a company and then sell the product from the company, right? To the back to the public. That I very much disagree with.
Mhm.
Like, I feel like if you're going to take government funding, uh, you should not be able to, if you're going, I feel like there has to be some type of buyout clause. Like if you're going to then privatize it, I feel like you either need to pay the government back the funding that you got, or you need to be essentially subsidizing what you're selling.
Mhm.
But I
Well,
yes, that is he talks about the financial crisis. It's the same thing. It's socializing the losses and privatizing the gains. Like, yeah, I agree. I disagree with that.
yeah, I mean, it says they were publicly financed, so I guess they were technically paying interest, and you would pay, future taxes on some of the gains. But yeah, and similar to the Tesla, I think Tesla received I think it was like a $500 million subsidy from the government, and basically the government couldn't participate in the upside, so they really should have required an equity split. Like they should have required shares, and maybe that's just a lesson to be learned. Like if and I actually I didn't really realize there were subsidies like this that you could start companies. Um, but yeah, it would seem like if the government is funding your company, they should get an equity split.
Yeah, I
Um,
100% agree with that.
yeah, so that's kind of, I guess,
I mean, but this goes
uh,
back to like, yeah, that's not yeah, I feel like that's ridiculous. Like that should not happen. Because then, I
yeah,
mean, from the taxpayer's perspective, the taxpayer is paying to build the company, and then
yeah,
they have to pay for the good at like full price. Like that's silly.
yeah.
Because you're essentially putting money into the company. So like you should get some equity in it. Like, yeah. But I mean, so
Um,
he rags on, I mean, he like calls all like pharmaceutical companies like, like exploiters of patients. I mean, I feel like he misses the point that there would be no one treated if there weren't drug companies. Like there would be no drugs.
mhm.
And he sort of rags on the US system a lot, but he also, I feel like always, I mean, the statistic I always come back to is, and I always forget if it's 70 or 90, but I think it's 90%, but just to be conservative, I think 70% of medical innovation in drugs come out of the United States. Like there's a legitimate question to be asked as to, why do you think that is?
well, I would say it's because they're the most protected here.
Right. So
So so the companies have gone where they're treated best.
right, right. So that's
Hmm.
totally counter to what he's saying though, that these other companies where, all these people, he's like, it's such an appeal to emotion. It's all these patients are dying because companies here charge too much. In reality, it's all these people are surviving because we developed the drugs. We have way more people that get the drugs that are even available that wouldn't exist otherwise if we did not have the system that we have in place.
But I guess the just to play devil's advocate, I mean, there are inventions and apps and innovations that come up that are not patent protected.
Sure.
So wouldn't that imply that there would still be drugs that are made?
How much do you think it costs to make an app?
I mean, it could cost a lot depending on what you're doing. I have no idea.
Would it cost over, $1 billion to $2 billion?
I mean, I don't know that. I mean, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, well, I
Depending on
mean,
what you're doing. But I guess if I guess my question to you is like, how do you think the world would be if there were just no patents?
but okay, I can speak about drugs the best because this is more or less what I do. Okay, so if you were to spend uh close to $1 billion to one, discover a drug, take it through FDA testing, so both
So
safety and
okay, okay,
efficacy. Let me
okay,
just finish.
okay.
Right. So you're spending well over $1 billion to then produce it. So you're then setting up a process plant where you can make it and then sell it. And then if you could not protect it, what would stop someone from just taking what you've made, like chemically, going and starting the tail end of that process, which by the way is usually one of the cheaper, the cheaper parts is just the mass production. Like it's much easier than discovering it, testing it, showing it's safe, doing all these things, and just start mass producing it, and they could undersell you by like, threefold. Or they wouldn't even
I
have to undersell you by
hmm
threefold. They could do it by like, they could just sell it for like, $20 less and people would be buying their stuff.
hmm but
What
I guess
what
I would go back to the Uber and Lyft example. Isn't that what Lyft did? They let Uber develop everything, the idea, everything, and then they just basically took it. They saw it was working, and they went and did it. So how is that any different?
I think it's different in the startup cost.
Okay, and then I guess I would,
There's
and
not
then what?
nearly as much
Uh-huh.
startup cost to do these other things. Like, yeah,
Well,
I get what you're saying, but I'm just saying this
uh-huh.
goes back at a certain point, like, yeah, at a certain point in startup costs, like either no one will do it or the government has to do it or it has to be protected. So someone privately will do it. So I mean, yeah, if you just want to say like all medicine should be socialized and all the, we should just pour, government funding into making drugs, then sure, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But I'm just saying, like, when I like look at things, if we could not protect our drug, we would not do any work.
And how much of that cost is like from the FDA? Like if there's no FDA, like what would the actual cost be, you think?
I mean, it would still be a lot to, I mean, well, I guess you could, the cynical people would just argue that probably pharmaceutical companies would just sell people whatever. But
Hmm
assuming you're doing you know, a you're doing a good job of still trying to show that your drug will do something and it is safe or relatively safe. The FDA, it is expensive to go through. You have to, I think it's $1 million to even essentially submit an application.
Uh-huh.
Uh, it's a lot. The testing is a lot.
Because on one hand, we're kind of saying like, the winners and the best actors will prevail over time. So I guess why would it be different in the drugs? Like why do you kind of get what I'm getting at, or
Right, but the all the startup work is done. Like all the hard part is all done.
but like why can't I protect a financial instrument? Like if I create some derivative, why can't I get a patent on it? Or I don't even know if I can, because like to me it seems like there's
I
very
don't know.
very
I don't know why
very
you can't do that.
yeah yeah it just seems like there's different treatment, I guess. But I get why companies come here because they're protected, and that's why people do real estate here because it's protected. And like
Right.
I get it. Like, but I just yeah I have
I guess to his point, like I feel like you can't. I feel like it's not fair to like rag on these to like call these people evil when the alternative is, for the most part, most of it would not exist. So there's a subsection of the population that is saved. He's just talking about all these people that are dying because companies charge too much. But there's a massively larger subset of the population that is alive because those companies are allowed to charge. Does that make sense? Right? Like,
I mean the fact that it's so protected, I feel like companies would go out of their way to make drugs that are, could claim they're helping someone in some way. But I don't know. Maybe I'm kind of like, I don't take a lot of stuff. Maybe,
yeah, I don't either.
so, um, I guess I did, I mean, we've kind of gone through a lot, but, Um, I don't know. Have you ever felt exploited in a contract?
I ever felt exploited in the contract? No. I mean, I was a little curious about those. Did you understand that part where he's talking about companies forcing people to go to arbitrators and they couldn't sue?
I think some of the, when you got all the little text and they make you check the box, sometimes it says like, yeah, it goes to like or like a mediator. It wouldn't go to like a court if you had an issue.
So
And
I
I
feel
think
like
they,
I vaguely remember talking to Dad about this, and he said those. I don't know. I feel like honestly, I sort of wish that he was on for this, but a lot of times I feel like that is against the Constitution almost. I think maybe we should check with him, and then we can maybe do a little tidbit in the next episode about that.
yeah,
Because
it's
isn't it
interesting.
you are isn't that one of the amendments constitutionally protected to a maybe that's
Yeah,
criminal cases. I don't know.
yeah, I'm not too sure. But I know he mentioned like interest rates. Like sometimes there's like a stated interest rate, but then they throw in some fees and so I kind of felt that one like this one um loan I have right now for one of the properties, like the listed interest rate was 4.55%. And I guess I mean, as like when I'm going through my actuarial classes, like they teach you about different types of interest rates. Like, is it monthly nominal? Is it an annual rate? Is it this or that? But this rate actually had like a factor that was applied to it after. And it's like, yeah, like in section, 43, if you go way down, it says like a factor of, 1.02 will be applied to any interest rate. I'm like, okay, that's not cool. um, but
Okay,
I
that's kind of not now that would I say would be exploitative.
it sure felt like it. But I mean, recently a couple thing, and it's like I already mentioned the tax thing, like, and that feels sleazy to me. And but just to show that not all landlords are bad, and sometimes the landlords get exploited. I had a tenant who's been a renter now for like 2 years in one of my single family homes. When he came on, he said there was no pets. We had no pets, and if there were pets, there'd be like an extra amount each month and an extra pet deposit. So we did a random check a few months ago, and not only is there one pet, there are four dogs in the house. And he is now claiming that three of them were guests and that one is now an emotional support animal. Um, so now we had to look up the rule. It feels like this is fraud, basically. But he
Did he
says
show
he
you
got a
the
doctor's note and he's got to provide it. I think he's got another like 4 or 5 days to provide it.
yeah.
But just to show that
Yeah.
not all
I mean,
even the quote unquote big guys, because I was talking to my wife that like we're like I feel like I'm getting exploited more often than I'm doing the exploiting. But she's like, no, well, you're definitely you'd be considered like a big dog. You would be considered an
right.
exploiter, not the
Yeah.
exploited.
I mean, I had a woman on the phone tell me she just wasn't going to pay rent and I could evict her. And it took like 2 or 3 months to evict her. So it's like, right. There are people, I feel like, I don't know. I just feel like, guys like just hate everyone that's, done well, essentially. And they make it sound like they're always the bad people when, like anything, it's a bell curve. There are good people that are rich. There are bad people that are rich. There are good people that are poor. There are bad people that are poor.
Yep.
Just the way of the world.
I
I mean,
guess.
mom and dad have talked about people that have paid, of tenants that have paid cash for Barnard, like paid 3 months cash and then they just never paid again. And
Mhm.
they had, after 3 months, trying to collect, they won't pay. And yeah, you get like there's this group of people that will essentially migrate from house to house, and they get like 2 months of free rent, and then they move on.
Hmm. Gosh.
Yeah.
I guess one of this was like the last. Well, I mean, I could talk about a lot of other stuff, but we've kind of been running long. I guess one other thought that he had that I liked, and I think we should think about is, so we read the book 1984, and that talked about government kind of encroaching on people's freedom, changing our language. He said he brought up the good point that the influence doesn't necessarily have to be coming from the governments, and that it could be coming from these big corporations, and that you could be getting influenced and peer pressured into certain thoughts or language, not from the government, by corporations. And I thought that was a good thing to be thinking about, that um, it's not just the government that you need to worry about how they're influencing your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I actually very much agree with that. I felt like what he was saying, I mean, he was making it sound like this is happening more on the right side of the political spectrum, where I think it's probably exactly the opposite, in that those big tech companies are very much overwhelming, very, very liberal, and they're pushing yeah, much more liberal agendas. Yeah, Fox News is very dogmatic in its approach, but to act like MSNBC isn't is, I think, kind of silly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I thought that was. I mean, after reading this book, it's like it kind of makes me like it's like paranoia. Like I got to be like kind of cognizant of the government, and then I also have to be cognizant of all this other stuff. It kind of just like I don't know, it makes me want to like abandon like the system altogether. Like just abandon like living like normally, like in the neighborhood, like just go live off the land. Like I know I go through phases where I like really feel like, yeah, I'm just done. I'm done with like this system.
Well, I guess it's good you got all that land in Apache County there, Jack.
Yeah. Well, actually I don't now because I sold most of it.
That's good.
But um okay, anything else, Al?
I got no closing thoughts.
Um you know what? Okay, so there is one other thing I wanted to bring up. So he brought up that not all actions have to be through government policy. And he brought up the idea of littering. So, like, if you build a culture around not littering, then people won't litter. Um, but then he goes on to say certain things have to be by the government. And then I was kind of thinking, well, why can't those also be influenced by our culture also? Because we talked about last week about what is culture. Culture is like your underlying assumptions that trickles down to like your values, and then that trickles down to your practices or your daily routines. So I kind of feel like it was a contradiction. He was contradicting himself. So I did want to bring that up. Um, um, and I guess I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but that's kind of how
No,
I would take it.
I agree with that statement that you just made.
Yeah. So okay. Um, Well, with that said, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I'm Jack Allweil, and with me, as always, is my brother Alex Allweil. Al, it's been a good discussion. And next time, we have the last book in this book draft, and that is Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life.
Written by
Um,
best-selling Japanese author Hector Garcia.
yeah, so it should be a fun one. Should be a quick read. It looks like this book was hard to get through. Al, I gotta say, this Road to Freedom book.
Yeah, absolutely was.
So that being said, good discussion, and We'll see you all next time.
Next time.